Chapter 21. Old Henry. Old Henry appeared at the back door late one afternoon. He looked like an old sailor returning from the sea. His face was ruddy and lined with wrinkles, his hair gray and uncombed. He wore an old pair of boots and carried the rest of his belongings in a faded duffel bag. He mumbled when he talked, because most of his teeth were missing, but as he looked up at Eddie's mom standing on the back porch stairs, she pieced together that he was hungry and that he had a reason for being at their house. As he sat at the table soaking cornbread in his soup beans, his story began to come out. "You seen them tombstones back of the house there?" he asked. "Them's my people. I was raised right here on this hilltop. I've been away for a while now, working here and there, trying to make a living, but now I'm back. I'm home. Wondered if there'd be anything I could put my hand to around here. I'd be much obliged." Old Henry spent the night on the couch while Eddie's folks tried to figure out what to do with an old alcoholic with no place to go. In the morning they invited him to stay on, hoping they'd figure something out. What they learned was that Henry had been an old-time logger. He was tougher than a hickory stump, but walked with a limp from an accident in the woods. As Eddie's dad talked to Henry, he began to get inspired. He invited Henry to walk the 27 acres up behind the house. Cruising the timber, Henry spotted stands of poplar and oak that had grown up in the years since he'd been away. The trees ran clear up to the ridge line, and they were ready to be harvested. He and Eddie's dad decided to go into business together. The first investment was a sturdy 2-stall pole barn that went up back of the house. It was sided with pine boards, but the floor had to be of black gum because it will never split. When it was finished, Eddie's dad and Henry went off to the stock sale. When they came back, they were as proud as peacocks. They were followed by a man pulling a horse trailer. When the doors were open, royalty stepped off that trailer, a matched pair of golden Percheron workhorses that Henry named Dick and Bess. They were amazing animals, their heads nearly reaching to the roof. Their backs were as broad as a couch, and white horse feathers ruffled their enormous hooves. The next day, Henry expertly harnessed them up, placing brown leather horse collars around their sturdy necks before putting on the metal hames. He threw the leather harness over their backs, adjusting straps here and there, and fastening the crupper under their tails. He hooked the chains to a single tree, a piece of wood that kept the chains spread and out from under the hooves. The logs would be felled and hooked to the single tree for dragging down to the truck that waited in the holler. With the proceeds from their first sale of logs, Eddie's dad bought a small metal building that he set up to be Henry's place up near where the gravestones were. Each day Henry would hitch up the horses and head to the woods with a chainsaw. In the evening he would come back down the hill, hang the harnesses on the wall, and carefully comb out the golden coats of Dick and Bess. He'd stand back to admire his handiwork, throw his chest out proudly and say, $5,000 wouldn't take them horses off this hill. Then he'd retire to his little house with a 6-pack of Budweiser, and we wouldn't see him until the next day. Old Henry got to be part of the family, or we became part of his. One evening, the boys were shelling out peanuts from a large sack Eddie's mom had brought home. Henry got to hankering after some peanuts, but he had no teeth to chew them with. Looking around, he saw a coffee grinder sitting on the kitchen counter. His eyes squinted and the corners of his grizzled mouth went up. He'd show those young pups. He took a handful of peanuts and went to the grinder. Pouring them into the hopper, he began to crank the handle. He kept cranking and held his hand under the spout. He waited and waited. I'm not sure what he was expecting, but what finally came slowly out of the grinder was long and brown and looked too much like something you'd accidentally step in. Henry's smile faded, and with a snort he flung open the back door and pitched his handful outside. Henry stayed with the family all through 1 year and into the next. His health slowly began to get worse as his years of drinking finally caught up with him. About the time the timber was done, so was Henry. One afternoon he hobbled down to Eddie's house. He warmed himself by the heater for a bit, and then moved over to the couch. He didn't speak for a while. The boys figured he'd dozed off. When at last they looked over at him, they realized he'd drifted on into eternity, right there on their couch. If you ever get a chance to visit that old farmhouse and you walk up on the knoll behind it, you may see some old sandstone grave markers. Beside them is one that will be newer. It's a simple stone for a simple man. It bears the name Henry. He's home.